Ever had that sinking feeling in your gut when you realize your private sanctuary, the one place you can truly escape, has been violated? Now, amplify that feeling by a factor of 10 and add the flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser painting streaks across the trees you planted with your own hands. That was my Tuesday. I decided to come back a week early from a grueling work project, dreaming of the scent of pine, the crackle of a fireplace, and the profound silence of my cabin nestled deep in the woods. Instead, I was met with two sheriff's deputies and a woman with a haircut so severe it looked like it could cut glass, standing on my porch as if she owned the place. Her name, I would soon learn, was Carol, and she was the president of our little community's homeowners association. She looked at me, then at my dusty car, with an expression of supreme annoyance, as if I were a raccoon that had just tipped over her personal trash can. I stepped out of the car, my mind still trying to catch up with my eyes. "Can I help you, officers?" I asked, my voice betraying a confusion that was rapidly curdling into anger. The shorter of the two deputies stepped forward. "Sir, we received a call about a potential trespasser. Does this woman know you?" He gestured towards Carol, who crossed her arms and puffed out her chest. "He most certainly does not know me in the way he implies," she snapped, her voice a reedy instrument of indignation. "I am Carol Jenkins, the HOA president. This property was flagged for emergency maintenance. The owner is not due back for another week. This man is trespassing." My jaw practically hit the gravel driveway. "Trespassing? This is my cabin. I am Alex Kartev. My name is on the deed, the mailbox, and the welcome mat she's currently standing on." I pointed, and for the first time, I noticed my quirky go-away mat was gone, replaced by a generic floral thing. A small detail, but it felt like a dagger. What they didn't know, what Carol and her infinite, self-appointed authority couldn't possibly fathom, was that my day job had made me uniquely suited for this exact brand of bureaucratic warfare. I'm a forensic accountant. I don't just look at numbers. I hunt for the story hidden in the margins, the truth buried under layers of deceit and fabricated invoices. My entire career is built on dismantling arrogant people who think they're untouchable. Carol had just volunteered to be my pro bono project for the fall. Have you ever dealt with an HOA that seems to think its authority extends to the very air you breathe? A board that mistakes enforcing bylaws for ruling a tiny, vinyl-sided kingdom? I had always managed to fly under the radar, pay my dues on time, and keeping my property pristine precisely to avoid people like Carol. But she hadn't just put herself on my radar. She had parked her metaphorical tank on my front lawn and dared me to do something about it. Stick around, because this story isn't just about the satisfaction of getting my cabin back from a squatter with a clipboard. It's a step-by-step guide on how to methodically, legally, and very publicly dismantle a petty tyrant using nothing more than their own hubris, a laptop, and a beautifully organized spreadsheet. The game was on, and Carol had no idea she was playing against a grandmaster. She thought she was just shooing away a stray cat, but she was about to find out she'd kicked a hornet's nest built inside a calculator. The deputies were, to be fair, stuck in the middle of a situation they had no context for. I showed them my driver's license with the cabin's address. I showed them my car registration. I even had a copy of my property tax bill in my glove compartment. Any reasonable person would see the truth. But Carol was not a reasonable person. She was a force of pure, unadulterated entitlement. With a flourish, she produced a piece of paper from a pristine folder she was carrying. "As you can see, officers," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "this is an emergency maintenance authorization signed by me in my capacity as board president. We had reports of a potential roof leak that could damage the structural integrity of the dwelling. According to HOA Bylaw 7, Section 4C, the board has the right to access any property to prevent imminent damage." I scanned the document. It was dated 3 days ago. The report was anonymous, of course. My roof was brand new, installed last year, and rated for hurricane-force winds. The only thing threatening its integrity was the sheer weight of Carol's audacity. "My roof is fine," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "And this document doesn't give you the right to occupy my home. Where are the maintenance workers? Where's the report from a licensed contractor? Carol sniffed. The initial assessment was completed. We are awaiting a full quote. In the meantime, the property must be monitored. I was just checking on things when this person arrived. The deputies exchanged a weary look. Sir, the taller one said, this seems to be a civil matter. She is what looks like an official HOA document. We can't remove her if the HOA grants her access. Your dispute is with them, not with her presence here today. Technically, I felt a surge of hot, helpless fury. I was being told I was the interloper on my own land. So, are you saying I have to leave my own property? We're not saying you have to leave, he clarified. But we can't force her to leave either. If you two can't work it out, it becomes a legal issue for the courts. Frankly, we can't stay here and mediate. We have other calls, and just like that, they were gone, leaving me in my own driveway with the woman who had commandeered my life. Now that that's settled, Carol said, turning to me with a smug little smile, I'll be staying until the contractor provides the final report. For security, of course. You can find a motel in town. She then had the gall to walk inside my cabin and shut the door in my face. I heard the deadbolt click. I stood there for a full 5 minutes, listening to my own blood roaring in my ears. I was locked out. I spent the night in a depressing motel off the highway, the floral bedspread smelling faintly of despair and stale cigarettes. The next morning, my inbox pinged. It was an email from Carol, sent from the official HOA president account. The subject line was Notice of Violations, Lot 74, my lot. My heart hammered as I opened it. It was a list, a long and ridiculously petty list. My woodpile was stacked half an inch too high. The native wildflowers I'd cultivated near the driveway were an unapproved landscaping modification. The color of the stain on my deck, the same color it had been for 5 years, was suddenly not on the pre-approved palette. Each violation was accompanied by a grainy photo, clearly taken from inside my cabin, looking out. She was building a case against me, using her illegal occupation as a reconnaissance mission. The email ended with a chillingly cheerful line. To avoid further fines, please remedy these issues at your earliest convenience. P.S. I had a locksmith rekey the doors to secure the property during this maintenance period. The HOA will hold the new keys until the situation is resolved. That was it. The line had been crossed, obliterated, and paved over. This was no longer just trespassing. This was a declaration of war. My frustration solidified into a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't in my cabin, but I had my laptop. I logged into my work accounts, not to do my job, but to use the same powerful research tools I use to track corporate fraud. I started with the HOA's website. It was a clunky, outdated mess, but it had a portal with public documents, meeting minutes, budgets, and the hallowed bylaws. I downloaded everything. For the next 8 hours, fueled by terrible motel coffee, I read. I read every line of the bylaws Carol so proudly wielded, cross-referencing them with state property laws. I scoured years of meeting minutes, noting every mention of emergency maintenance. I dove into the budgets, the line items, the vendor payments. It was tedious, but in the dry, black and white text, a pattern began to emerge. A story. And it was a story I knew how to read better than anyone. My first concrete step was to get eyes on the ground. I drove to a hardware store and bought the most advanced trail camera they had, one that looked convincingly like a birdhouse. After dark, I hiked through the woods behind my property, my footsteps muffled by pine needles. I found a sturdy oak with a perfect, unobstructed view of my front porch and driveway. I strapped the little birdhouse camera to it, linked it to my phone, and settled in to watch. I didn't have to wait long. The next day, the camera started sending me notifications. It wasn't a roofing contractor that pulled in my driveway. It was a luxury sedan. A man in a golf shirt got out, and Carol greeted him on my porch with a kiss. They carried in groceries. Later that afternoon, another car arrived. Another couple. The 4 of them sat on my deck furniture, drinking wine from my wine glasses. My structurally compromised cabin was being used as a weekend party house. The rage was a physical thing, a hot coal in my stomach, but I channeled it. This wasn't just evidence of trespassing. It was evidence of her motive. It wasn't about a leak. It was about a free vacation. But I needed more. The personal angle was good, but the financial angle would be the kill shot. I focused on the HOA's expense reports. Payments for emergency services were a recurring theme, always on properties whose owners, I discovered through some light social media and property record sleuthing, were snowbirds or infrequent visitors. And one vendor name appeared over and over. Prestige Home Solutions. There were dozens of payments to this company over the last 3 years, totaling a staggering amount of money. The invoices were vague, citing things like preventative foundation sealing or emergency gutter realignment. They were all authorized by one person, Carol Jenkins. This was the thread I had been looking for. Now it was time to pull it and see what unraveled. The hunt for Prestige Home Solutions began. A company receiving that much money from an HOA should have a significant digital footprint, a professional website, a business address, maybe some customer reviews on Yelp or Angie. Prestige had none of that. A standard internet search came up completely empty, which in today's world is more suspicious than a bad review. This wasn't just a low-profile company. It was a ghost. My next stop was the Secretary of State's official business entity database. Every legitimate company, even a sole proprietorship operating under a different name, has to be registered. I typed in the name, and bingo. Prestige Home Solutions was a registered LLC. My pulse quickened. This was the first real breadcrumb. The registration documents were public records, available for a small fee. I paid it without a second thought. As the PDF downloaded, I felt that familiar thrill, the one I get right before I break a case open. The information was sparse, but it was everything I needed. The company was formed 3 years ago, right around the time Carol became HOA president. The business address listed was APO Box in a town 30 miles away. There were no officers listed, no CEO, no president, just a single registered agent. The name listed for the registered agent was Caroline Maiden, which was just a little too on the nose. A quick public records search confirmed my suspicion. Jenkins was Carol's married name. Her maiden name was, of course, Maiden. She had used a slight variation, but it was sloppy. Arrogant people are always sloppy. They believe they're too smart to get caught, so they cut corners. Caroline Maiden was Carol Jenkins. The contracting company that had been paid tens of thousands of dollars for phantom repairs was a shell corporation, and she was its sole owner. The money the HOA paid out was going directly into her own pocket. This was no longer a simple case of trespassing or abuse of power. This was textbook embezzlement and wire fraud. My trail camera continued to provide a wealth of infuriating detail. It captured footage of Carol's friends using my hot tub, her guest grilling on my new barbecue, and even a delivery truck dropping off a brand new patio umbrella. She wasn't just staying in my cabin. She was upgrading it with my stolen HOA dues. I meticulously downloaded every video, time-stamped every event, and saved them to a secure cloud drive. Each clip of her laughing on my porch was another nail in her coffin. Now that I had the what and the how, I needed the who else had been a victim of Carol's scheme. I spent an afternoon cross-referencing the addresses from the Prestige Home Solutions invoices with the county property records. I identified 5 other properties, all owned by out-of-towners. I needed an ally on the inside, someone who lived there year-round and could give me a sense of the community's mood. I remembered an elderly gentleman named George from the one and only HOA meeting I had ever attended. He had tried to ask a question about the budget, and Carol had shut him down with brutal efficiency. He seemed like a man who wasn't easily intimidated, just temporarily silenced. I found his number in the community directory and gave him a call. I introduced myself and explained, in brief terms, that I was having a serious issue with Carol and the HOA board. Ah, Queen Carol, George's voice crackled over the phone. Let me guess. You broke one of her sacred rules, like having a garden gnome that was an unapproved shade of red. I chuckled. Something a bit more serious, I'm afraid. She's locked me out of my own house and is living in it. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Well, George said finally, that's a new one, even for her. The woman's always been a tyrant, but this is grand larceny with a welcome mat. What do you need, son? I spent the next hour laying out what I had found. I didn't give him all the details of the Shell Corporation yet, just my suspicions about the strange maintenance charges and the fact that I was gathering evidence. George listened patiently, interjecting with his own stories of Carol's reign of terror. Fines for bird feeders, threats over holiday decorations, a constant stream of petty abuses. He confirmed that the other victims on my list were, indeed, seasonal residents who were rarely around. People are afraid of her, George explained. She knows the bylaws inside and out because she rewrites them to suit her needs. The rest of the board just rubber stamps whatever she wants. They're either her cronies or too scared to stand up to her. I had my ally. George wasn't just moral support. He was my town crier, my catalyst. He knew the people, the politics, and the pressure points of our small community. My plan began to crystallize, moving from a vague notion of revenge to a precise, multi-stage operation. It would be a slow burn, a carefully constructed trap that Carol would walk into willingly, blinded by her own arrogance. The centerpiece of this trap would be the one place she felt most powerful, the annual HOA meeting. It was just 3 weeks away. It would be her stage, her throne room, and it would be the site of her spectacular downfall. The first step in springing the trap was to make Carol feel even more secure, more powerful. I needed to play the part of the frustrated but ultimately impotent homeowner. I drafted a formal letter sent via certified mail to every member of the HOA board, including Carol. It was professional, citing the specific state laws she was breaking regarding illegal eviction and trespassing. I detailed the locksmith incident and formally requested the immediate return of my property keys and an itemized invoice from the supposed roofing contractor. It was a letter that screamed, "I'm going to sue you," which was exactly the reaction I wanted. It positioned me as a predictable threat, one she thought she knew how to handle. I was laying my cards on the table, or so she would think. The real cards, the ones about Prestige Home Solutions and Caroline Maiden, remained hidden up my sleeve. While I waited for her response, I continued my digital deep dive. I found Carol's social media profiles. They were a goldmine of self-congratulatory posts. Pictures of her at charity galas, posts about community leadership, and humble brags about her tireless work for the HOA. The irony was suffocating. But among the sanitized posts, I found a crucial detail. She frequently tagged a woman named Brenda, her sister. A quick search of Brenda's profile revealed photos of a family reunion. And there, in a group photo, was Carol, years younger, standing next to her parents. The caption read, "So good to be back with the whole Maiden clan." It was the final, definitive link. Not that I needed it, but in a forensic case, you can never have too much proof. A week later, I received a reply. It wasn't from a lawyer, which told me everything about her overconfidence. It was a 2-page letter written by her, dripping with legalese she'd clearly copied from a website. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic bullying. She cited bylaw after obscure bylaw, many of which I now knew she had authored herself. She claimed my hostile letter was a form of harassment against the board. She stated that the locks were changed to protect HOA assets from potential vandalism by me, the disgruntled owner. And she included an invoice. It was from Prestige Home Solutions for emergency roof tarping and assessment for the tidy sum of $2,500. It was a work of fiction, of course, but it was on official-looking letterhead. She had just handed me a key piece of evidence, a fraudulent invoice linking my specific case to her criminal enterprise. I almost laughed out loud. She was so sure of her own cleverness, so insulated within her tiny fiefdom, that she couldn't see the hole she was digging for herself. My plan now had 3 distinct phases. Phase 1 was complete. I had the evidence, and I had provoked the target. Phase 2 was mobilization. I called George. "It's time," I said. "I need to talk to a few people." Quietly, I gave him the names of the other homeowners who had received emergency maintenance from Prestige Home Solutions. I asked him to approach them, not with accusations, but with simple questions. "George, just ask them if they were happy with the work done by Prestige. Ask if they ever saw a final report." Plant the seed of doubt. George, a retired union organizer, knew exactly how to have these conversations. He was a master of the subtle art of sowing dissent. While George worked his magic on the ground, I focused on the main event, the presentation. I wasn't just going to stand up and yell accusations. I was going to deliver a calm, professional, and utterly devastating takedown. I started building a PowerPoint presentation. The title slide was intentionally boring. A review of community vendor policies and fiscal oversight. It sounded like something that would put half the room to sleep, which was perfect. The subsequent slides were a masterclass in forensic accounting, simplified for a lay audience. I created charts showing the sharp increase in maintenance spending over the past 3 years. I made a timeline that correlated these spikes with Carol's presidency. I embedded the corporate registration documents for Prestige Home Solutions. I included screenshots from social media, satellite images of my perfectly intact roof, and, of course, the best hits from my trail cam footage. Each piece of evidence was a single, undeniable fact. Alone, they were suspicious. Together, they formed an airtight case for fraud, embezzlement, and a level of breathtaking arrogance that was almost impressive. The final piece of the plan involved timing. I emailed the HOA board secretary, a meek-looking woman named Doris, and formally requested a 10-minute slot on the annual meeting agenda to discuss my proposal for improving our contractor vetting process. It was so benign, so constructive, that there was no legitimate reason to deny it. Carol would see it as me trying to be a nuisance about my little roofing issue. She would see it as an opportunity to publicly humiliate me and shut me down in front of the entire community. She would grant the request without a second thought, eager for the confrontation. She was the spider, and I was the fly. Or so she believed. In reality, she was the one buzzing ever closer to a web she couldn't see, a web I had woven from her own lies. The stage was set. The script was written. All I had to do was wait for showtime. The weeks leading up to the annual meeting were a strange mix of simmering rage and focused calm. Every day, my phone would buzz with a new notification from the birdhouse camera. Carol and her friends lounging on my deck chairs. Carol's car parked in my spot, a constant, infuriating reminder of her occupation. Each image fueled my resolve. I poured that energy into perfecting my presentation, honing each slide until it was a polished, irrefutable point of law and fact. I rehearsed it in my drab motel room, speaking to my own reflection in the mirror, practicing keeping my voice steady and my tone professional, even as I described acts of blatant criminality. George, true to his word, was a brilliant field marshal. He reported back to me every few days. The seeds of doubt were sprouting. One homeowner he spoke to, a retired snowbird from Florida, recalled being billed $4,000 by Prestige for emergency plumbing work that his own trusted handyman later said was completely unnecessary. Another remembered a hefty bill for tree trimming of a tree that didn't even exist on her property. They had all grumbled, but alone they felt powerless. Now, hearing that others had similar experiences, their grumbling was turning into a low roar. George made sure they all knew the date and time of the annual meeting. He told them a fellow homeowner was going to raise some important questions about the budget attendance he predicted would be unusually high this year. A few days before the meeting, I executed the next step. I packaged all my evidence, the financial analysis, the corporate documents, the surveillance videos, the fraudulent invoice, and sworn affidavits from 2 of the other victims George had cultivated, into a neat, comprehensive digital folder. I wrote a cover letter, a dispassionate summary of the facts, and addressed it to the white-collar crime division of the district attorney's office. I also prepared a separate, slightly different package for the IRS, focusing on the undeclared income and tax evasion aspect of the shell corporation. I didn't send them yet. They were my trump card, the finality I would bring down upon Carol, but only at the moment of maximum impact. The day before the meeting, Carol made a predictable move. I received an email from the board's secretary, Doris. "Dear Mr. Carter," it read, "President Jenkins has reviewed the agenda and feels that your proposed topic is not a constructive use of the community's time during the annual meeting. We can schedule a private review with the architectural committee at a later date." "Your agenda item has been removed?" I smiled. It was exactly the kind of arrogant, procedural power play I expected. I immediately replied, CCing the entire board. Dear Doris and board members, per HOA Bylaw 12, Section 2, any member in good standing may address the board at the annual meeting for a period not to exceed 10 minutes. Provided the request is submitted in writing at least 7 days prior. My request was submitted 14 days prior, and I am a member in good standing. Any attempt to remove me from the agenda is a direct violation of the governing bylaws of this association. I will be at the meeting tomorrow, and I will be speaking at my allotted time. Thank you. Alex Carter. The response was radio silence. I called her bluff, using her own weapon, the bylaws, against her. She couldn't back down without looking weak or admitting she was violating the rules. She would have to let me speak, confident that she could control the situation and shout me down. Her pride wouldn't allow for any other course of action. I had her. She was on the path, and the end of it was now just 24 hours away. I spent that final night not in the motel, but in my car, parked at a scenic overlook a few miles from the community. I couldn't bear another night in that stuffy room. I watched the stars come out over the mountains, the same mountains I could see from my cabin's porch. This whole ordeal had started because I just wanted to come home. Tomorrow I would. But first, I had to burn down the rotten structure that had taken it from me. I felt a profound sense of clarity. I wasn't just fighting for my cabin anymore. I was fighting for George and the retired couple from Florida and everyone else who had been bullied into submission by a petty tyrant on a power trip. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoring order. And tomorrow, order was coming. The community hall was a sterile, beige room with fluorescent lighting and a faint scent of old coffee. Rows of uncomfortable-looking plastic chairs faced a long table at the front, where the 5 board members sat like a panel of grim judges. Carol was in the center, of course, in the largest, most throne-like chair. She wore a severe navy blue pantsuit, her armor for the evening. When I walked in, laptop bag slung over my shoulder, her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. There was no recognition of guilt, no flicker of fear, just cold, dismissive contempt. It was the look one gives a bug just before squashing it. I chose a seat in the front row, directly in her line of sight. George arrived a few minutes later and gave me a subtle, encouraging nod before sitting with a group of other residents I recognized as the ones he'd been talking to. The room was more crowded than I'd ever seen it. Usually, these meetings attracted a dozen or so of the most bored or cantankerous homeowners. Tonight, there were at least 50 people. The air was thick with anticipation. The meeting began, and it was a masterclass in mundane bureaucracy. The treasurer, a nervous man named Arthur, read the budget report in a monotone drone. The secretary, Doris, read the minutes from the last meeting with painful slowness. Carol presided over it all with an iron fist, cutting off questions, tabling discussions, and pushing through her agenda with ruthless efficiency. She was in her element, the undisputed queen of this beige little kingdom. I sat patiently, my laptop on my knees, my face a neutral mask. I could feel her glancing at me occasionally, probably expecting me to interrupt or make a scene. I did nothing. I let her control the proceedings, letting her build her own pedestal higher and higher, making the eventual fall all the more spectacular. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of discussions about leaf blower etiquette and holiday decoration timelines, Carol looked down at her agenda. A tiny, cruel smile played on her lips. And finally, she announced, her voice laced with theatrical weariness, we have Mr. Alex Carter from Lot 74. He has insisted on taking up 10 minutes of our valuable time to discuss vendor policies. She said the words as if they were coated in something foul. Mr. Carter, the floor is yours. Please be brief. I stood up, walked to the front of the room, and connected my laptop to the projector. The blank white screen illuminated the wall behind the board members. I took a deep breath, faced the audience of my neighbors, and began. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Carol, for that warm introduction. A few people chuckled nervously as she said, my name is Alex Carter, and I want to talk about fiscal responsibility and protecting our community's assets. I clicked the remote, and the first slide appeared. It was the boring title I'd planned. A review of community vendor policies and fiscal oversight. Carol leaned back in her chair, a smirk fixed on her face. She was ready to be bored, then to dismiss me. Our HOA spends a significant portion of our dues on maintenance and repairs. I continued, my voice even and calm. It's crucial that we have a transparent and accountable process for vetting the contractors we hire. I'd like to propose a new framework, but to understand why it's needed, I think it's helpful to look at a recent case study. I clicked again. The next slide showed a beautiful, high-resolution photo of my cabin, bathed in sunlight. The caption read, Case Study, Lot 74. Emergency roof repair. The smirk on Carol's face faltered for a second. The room murmured. This was more specific than they had expected. On October 12th, I said, my voice like a news anchor's, an emergency was declared at this property due to a supposed roof leak. The owner, that's me, was out of town. I clicked again. A new slide appeared, showing a side-by-side comparison. On the left, a satellite image of my roof from a week before the emergency. On the right, one from the day after. They were identical. As you can see, there was no visible damage, no tarp, no sign of any work whatsoever. Because no work was needed. My roof is less than a year old. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Carol started to shift in her seat. Mr. Carter, this is not the appropriate forum for a personal grievance, she began, but I was already clicking to the next slide. The contractor hired for this emergency was a company called Prestige Home Solutions. The company's name was now in huge letters on the screen. They submitted this invoice for $2,500 for an assessment. A scanned image of the fraudulent invoice she had sent me appeared on screen. Arthur, the treasurer, squinted at it. I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He'd seen that letterhead before, many times. This is just one of over 30 invoices paid to this company by our HOA over the last 3 years, totaling over $150,000 of our money. A collective gasp went through the room. The number was stunning. I had their complete attention. Carol was no longer smirking. Her face was hardening, her eyes narrowing. The bug was starting to fight back. Mr. Carter, this is slander. Carol's voice was sharp, cracking through the stunned silence of the room. You have no right to make these baseless accusations. She started to rise from her chair, but I didn't even look at her. I kept my focus on the audience, on my neighbors. They are not accusations, Carol. They are facts, supported by evidence. My voice remained unervingly calm. I clicked the remote. The next slide was titled The Pattern of Behavior. It was a map of our community with 6 properties, including mine, highlighted in red. What do all these properties have in common? I asked the room. They're all owned by part-time residents, people who are often away for weeks or months at a time. And they have all been the subject of expensive emergency repairs billed by Prestige Home Solutions. George stood up from his seat. She's right about that, he boomed. They billed me $5,000 2 years ago for foundation stabilization when I was visiting my daughter for the winter. My brother-in-law is a contractor. He came and looked at it and said it was hogwash. Another woman stood up. Me too. A huge bill for asbestos abatement in my crawl space. I had it tested myself afterward. There was never any asbestos. Carol's face was now a blotchy, furious red. This is a coordinated attack. You are out of order, she shrieked, banging a small gavel on the table. The sound was tinny and pathetic against the rising tide of anger in the room. I ignored her and clicked to the next slide. It was a short, 30-second video clip. The quality was crystal clear. It showed Carol on the front porch of my cabin, greeting a man with a kiss. The date and time stamp from my birdhouse camera was clearly visible in the corner. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. I let the clip play, showing them carrying groceries inside, their demeanor relaxed and familiar. This, I said, pausing the video on a clear shot of their faces, is the emergency monitoring that our HOA president was conducting in my home. It appears the primary emergency was a critical shortage of Chardonnay and Brie. A wave of shocked laughter rolled through the audience. Carol was speechless. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The other board members looked at her, then at the screen. their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. I didn't give them time to recover. I clicked again. Another video. This one was a montage of clips: Carol's friend in my hot tub, a couple sunbathing on my deck, another couple grilling steaks on my barbecue. It was undeniable. She had turned my home into her personal resort. So the question is, I said, my voice dropping into a more serious, deliberate tone as I switched to a new slide. Who is Prestige Home Solutions? Who is this contractor we've paid over $150,000 to? A company with no website, no phone number, no physical address. The next slide was a screenshot of the state's corporate registration database. The name Prestige Home Solutions, LLC, was highlighted. As it turns out, they do have a registered agent. A single point of contact. Her name is Caroline Maiden. I let the name hang in the air. I could see the gears turning in the minds of the older residents, the ones who had been in the community for a long time. Doris, the secretary, gasped audibly. "Wait a minute," someone from the back called out. "Isn't that Carol's maiden name?" I smiled grimly and clicked to the final, devastating slide. It was a split screen. On the left, the corporate registration showing the name Caroline Maiden. On the right, a sunny, smiling photo from Carol's own social media page, a family picture I'd found. The caption below it read, "So happy to be with the whole Maiden clan." The trap had sprung. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy, and damning. Every eye was on Carol. Her face had collapsed. The fury was gone, replaced by the chalky white terror of someone who has been utterly and completely exposed. "This is a lie, a fabrication," she stammered, her voice a weak whisper. "You faked these documents." "Have I?" I replied, my voice ringing with authority. "These are public records, Carol, easily verifiable. For 3 years, you have been using your position as president to authorize payments for fake repairs on the homes of absent owners. You funneled that money, our money, into a shell corporation that you control. This isn't just a violation of the bylaws. It's multiple felonies. It's wire fraud. It's embezzlement. It's tax evasion." I turned to the rest of the board. "And you, the board, have a fiduciary duty to protect this community. By allowing this to happen, by rubber stamping her decisions without any oversight, you're also complicit." Arthur, the treasurer, looked like he was going to be sick. Doris was openly weeping. At that exact moment, as if on cue, the double doors at the back of the hall swung open. 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies stepped inside, the same 2 I had met in my driveway weeks ago. But this time, they weren't looking at me. They were looking directly at Carol. I had called their non-emergency line an hour before the meeting, explained that I would be presenting evidence of significant financial crimes at a public meeting, and suggested that the presence of law enforcement might be prudent to prevent a disturbance. One of the deputies held a file. "Carol Jenkins?" he asked, his voice calm and official, yet it echoed through the silent room like a thunderclap. "We have a warrant for your arrest." The downfall was swift and absolute. Carol's face, already pale, seemed to drain of all remaining color. The deputies walked calmly to the front of the room. The entire community watched in stunned silence as they asked her to stand up. The bravado, the arrogance, the sheer force of personality that had defined her reign, all of it evaporated in an instant. She was just a woman in a navy pantsuit, looking small and terrified as they placed her hands behind her back. The quiet click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound I had ever heard. As they let her out, she shot me a look of pure, venomous hatred, a final, impotent glare. I met her eyes, not with triumph, but with a cold, steady finality. I had promised myself I would dismantle her, and I had. The meeting, of course, descended into chaos. The remaining board members were bombarded with furious questions from the homeowners. Arthur, the treasurer, officially resigned on the spot, stammering about how he had no idea and that Carol handled all the vendor approvals herself. Doris followed suit, sobbing that she was just the secretary. Within 10 minutes, the entire HOA board had dissolved. It was a complete institutional collapse, brought on by the implosion of its corrupt leader. In the ensuing pandemonium, I simply packed up my laptop, gave a grateful nod to George, and walked out. My work there was done. The next morning, I sent the evidence packages to the district attorney and the IRS. I also filed a civil lawsuit against Carol personally for damages, trespassing, illegal eviction, and emotional distress. Her assets were quickly frozen as part of the criminal investigation, ensuring that she couldn't hide the money she had stolen. A locksmith hired by me and billed to the now-defunct HOA met me in my cabin. The feeling of my new key turning in the lock of the door swinging open to my own home was indescribably sweet. The place was a mess, of course. There were wine stains on the rug and dirty dishes in the sink. It smelled of her perfume, but it was mine again. I spent the entire day cleaning, airing the place out, scrubbing away every last trace of her presence. It was a cleansing ritual, a reclamation of my sanctuary. The legal battle was long, but ultimately one-sided. Faced with the mountain of irrefutable evidence I'd gathered, Carol had no choice but to plead guilty. She was convicted of multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. The judge was not lenient. He spoke of her egregious breach of trust and the predatory nature of her crimes, targeting people she knew were not there to defend their own homes. She was sentenced to 3 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, a sum totaling over $170,000 when all the fraudulent invoices were accounted for. Her house was sold to cover the debt. Her name became a cautionary tale in the community, a synonym for corruption and hubris. With the old board gone, an emergency election was held. George, to his own surprise, was nominated and elected as the new HOA president. He didn't want a job, but as he told me, someone has to clean up the mess, and this time, we're going to do it right. The new board, composed of honest and engaged homeowners, took my presentation as a blueprint for reform. They instituted a mandatory 3-quote system for any work over $500. All invoices had to be approved by a 3-person committee, and all payments were made public in a monthly newsletter. They rewrote the bylaws to severely limit the board's power for emergency actions, requiring documented proof from multiple independent sources. The community, once ruled by fear and apathy, began to heal. People started talking to each other again. The atmosphere at the meetings, which I now attended regularly, was one of collaboration, not conflict. The HOA, for the first time, actually started to feel like it was working for the homeowners instead of against them. My cabin is quiet again. The only sounds of the wind in the pines and the crackle of the fire. The ugly floral welcome mat is gone, replaced by my old go-away one. The whole ordeal was a violation, a disruption of the peace I cherish so deeply. But in the end, it brought about a strange and unexpected kind of purpose. I learned that my skills, the ones I use to untangle complex corporate lies, could be a powerful tool for justice on a much more personal scale. It taught me that bullies, no matter how powerful they seem, are often just a house of cards waiting for a steady hand to pull the right one out from the bottom. The moral of this story isn't complicated. It's about standing up for yourself, even when you feel powerless. It's about the fact that truth, when properly documented and methodically presented, is an unstoppable force. Arrogant people build their own prisons. Sometimes they just need a little help turning the key. So what's the most outrageous thing an HOA has ever tried to pull on you? Let me know in the comments. And always remember, when faced with a tyrant, don't just get mad. Get organized. Get evidence. And then get justice.